Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McCrae here. I've got the Jaws shirt on today because, of course, today we are talking about Ready Player One, directed by Steven Spielberg. Now, this is not going to be a formal movie review, okay? In case you haven't noticed yet about my channel, I don't really review movies in the formal sense, like a lot of others do. And there are a lot of people that do it, and they do it very well, but I don't consider myself a movie reviewer. I consider myself just a guy talking about movies, shit that he likes, shit that he doesn't like, shit that kind of ticks him off, shit that he loves, and I come at it from a perspective of working in the industry. So, I have things I want to vent about and talk about and that I'm passionate about, that I see or that I want to do, or films that I really like. And that's sort of where I come from in terms of this channel and what I'm doing. I'm not a formal movie reviewer, which is why you don't see me reviewing movies per se. But I am going to talk about Ready Player One from just a candid sort of perspective because I absolutely loved it. Now look, okay, you've heard me say this before, but it bears repeating because it's relevant to what I'm talking about here. I will be 39 in May. So this movie, in terms of the nostalgia, is definitely targeted towards my generation and a bit older and a bit younger. I have to admit, when I have not read the book. I'm not a big reader. I don't really read. I mean, I can read. I just don't read, which is ironic because I'm a professional voice actor and it's what I do for a living. So for all intents and purposes, I read for a living, but I don't read audiobooks. Okay, that's something those who do, my hat goes off to you. That's a very tedious thing. I've never done it. I don't have a desire to do it. So my area of expertise, of course, is in promos and national TV spots and commercials and animation and all that kind of stuff, movie trailers. But I'm not a big reader. I'm not a big reader. So I didn't read the book, and I won't ever read the book. I don't have an interest in reading the book. So I do know that there is quite a bit in the book that is very different from what ended up on screen, which makes sense, okay? Not everything that you can get in a book translates cinematically, okay? There are some things that are in the book that if you were like, okay, if I was to visually translate this, to illustrate this into a movie, this would be very boring and long and tedious. It's interesting to read, and I can think of it in my own mind, and I'm like, oh wow, this is, yes, oh wow, this is. But if you were to translate that onto the screen, it's like, okay, okay. Do you know what I'm saying? So I understand why those conscious creative choices are made, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But when you've got a guy like Steven Spielberg at the helm, arguably one of the greatest directors in motion picture history, you're in good hands. And I didn't know what to expect from this movie because when I saw the trailers, I was like, okay, it looks like a visual spectacle heavy on the CGI, which it is. But I was like, okay, if it wasn't Steven Spielberg, I would not go see this movie. I wouldn't. Regardless of the fact, it's all this pop culture stuff and it's all this, I'll catch it on Netflix, whatever, I'll catch it on VOD, not a big deal. But this is Steven fucking Spielberg. And when you start to hear that it's Steven Spielberg and you start to then read up on what it's about, and then you start to read up more about, the direction and the visual aesthetic they're going for and how it's a mishmash of live action and visual effects. So it's kind of like Avatar in that respect, right? I was like, okay, that's okay. Okay, now I'm interested. Okay. And then the reviews began to drop and it was like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. So I said to my girlfriend, I said, look, over Easter weekend, let's go check this out. And she's my age. She's a bit younger, but she's 35. But she'll be 36 in May, actually. Our birthdays are only 8 days apart, so we tend to celebrate our birthdays together. But she was like, yeah, like, let's go see this thing, right? It looks interesting. And she's very, knows a lot about symbolism and, mythology and religion and psychology. So she loves like the symbolism aspect of all the things that I probably, it goes over my head. So, I lean on her to be like, this is what it means. And I was like, wow, it's so amazing. It's really cool stuff. She's awesome. Anyway, so we decided, well, let's go see this movie. So we went and saw it. It was one of the most It was the most fun I've had at the movie theater in a long time. In a long time. It was just so classic Spielberg. If you have not seen the movie, you've got to go see the movie. Look, if you're somebody that grew up with E.T., with Raiders of the Lost Ark, with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, with Jaws, right? With Temple of Doom, with Last Crusade, with Goonies, you've got to go see this movie. It is classic Spielberg. And I'm not just talking about the nostalgia aspect of it. All that stuff is great. All that stuff is cool. But I'm talking about the adventure, the sense of adventure, the pacing of the movie, right? Getting emotionally attached to the characters. Now, were the characters heavily developed like this was some kind of drama? No, of course not. Okay. But there was enough character development that you can become attached to the characters. You know the basics. Okay. You're like, okay, let's go. Yeah. Okay. Do you know what I mean? It was amazing. I mean, it was so much fun, and I was a little skeptical that I don't want to watch a computer game, I don't want to just watch a movie that looks like I'm watching a computer game. I don't want to, but it was so well done. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it, but for those of you that have, that Shining scene, oh my God. Now, The Shining is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and it is my girlfriend's as well. She's not really into horror, but she appreciates The Shining because of the symbolism, and it's Stanley fucking Kubrick. Come on, right? So when the Shining scene came on, if you were to look at the two of us, we both had big, grins on our faces from ear to ear. We're just like, this is pretty fucking cool, and it's a long scene. It was just so, the visuals were great. The adventure was great. The pacing was great. It was classic Steven Spielberg. The Spielberg that we remember from the 80s. That's what you're going to get. Now, it's a modern film, so all the effects are modern, of course, right? It's not like the visual aesthetic looks like something from the 1980s, but it's that sense of adventure, that sense of wonder, that sense of, if this had come out 30 years ago, instant classic, would have knocked the fucking socks off, the box office. Steven Spielberg reminds us of why he's the king of movie blockbusters. I mean, you have to remember that not only was Jaws the first movie to ever break $100 million at, the box office, it was the movie that started the summer blockbuster. It was the movie that essentially started the movie blockbuster. Because prior to Jaws, there were no really bona fide movie blockbusters in the way that there was with Jaws, the way that it catapulted to the pop culture consciousness, the way that it really sort of sent this wave, no pun intended, out across, the entertainment and pop culture spectrum. And then of course came Star Wars 2 years later, and that, took it up even like another notch, right? To a whole different world or a whole different galaxy, no pun intended. We also forget that he's done this time and time again. Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, all the Indiana Jones movies, Catch Me If You Can, Minority Report, War of the Worlds. Even though, some people didn't like that, I actually, didn't mind his version of War of the Worlds. But he's done this time and time again. And he's also produced classic blockbusters as well, like, the Back to the Future trilogy, Gremlins, The Goonies, Poltergeist, even though some kind of believe that he more had a hand in directing Poltergeist. That's a whole other thing. You got to read up on that. It's kind of a bit tricky, but he's officially credited as a producer on the film. His name is attached to so many films that are in the pop culture that have changed the face of entertainment and cinema, that he is undoubtedly the blockbuster king, not just from a directing standpoint, but from a producing standpoint. But this is classic 1980s Steven Spielberg. This is the Spielberg we grew up with, the sense of adventure, the sense of, being a kid, that childlike thing. It's absolutely fantastic. And, you have to remember too that the movie, there's also a real world live action component to it as well. Now, the vast majority of the movie does take place in the Oasis, but I would say about 40, maybe 45% of the movie is taking place in the real world as well. And I think that helps to ground the movie in reality. It helps to remind the audience that even though this movie is is a visual spectacle that these avatars are not animated characters, they're real people in this visual world. So it helps to trick you that even though you're watching this visual spectacle and it's all animated, it's still real. Like, these are real people. You know, I'm watching these animated characters, but there's a real person behind it. It's not like watching like a Pixar film where, you know, you don't get that sense that these are real people. You know, they're animated characters through and through because it's an animated movie. But you don't get that with Ready Player One. At least I didn't. It's the same kind of thing that you get with Avatar, right? Where it's kind of like, you know, there's that live action component to it. So when you're on Pandora and it's all, you know, the visual effects and they're in their avatars, you're tricked into believing, well, I'm not really watching just an animated movie. I am literally in this other world that actually exists because there are real people behind these avatars. And that helps big time, at least for me, because I have no interest in watching just, you know, a computer game of a movie. I really believe, at the very least, you know, if you're my age, maybe, you know, a little bit older, a little bit younger, you are going to, at the very least, walk out of the theater thinking to yourself, that was a lot of fun. And it's not just the nostalgia. That's the thing. Like, this movie, you know, is being marketed because of the nostalgia and it's 80s pop culture, you know, it's a bit of 90s pop culture, and there's even, you know, some 2000s, you know, in there as well. And yes, that's a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun to try and pick out, oh, look at that. Oh, holy shit. Oh, look at that. But for me, it wasn't the nostalgia that kept me hooked on this movie. It was the pacing and that sense of Spielberg 80s adventure. I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this is a lot of fun. This is a fun fucking movie. Do you know what I mean? And the nostalgia is just like the icing on the cake. The fact that, you know, Parsifal was riding around in a DeLorean is just icing on the cake. But you replace the DeLorean with, I don't know, just a regular car, and the whole sequence of that race at the very beginning plays out the exact same way. It's still fucking amazing and awesome. Like, the way that they constructed the visual aesthetic for that race, and the fact that, I don't think this is a spoiler to say, but spoiler alert if you don't want to hear this, but I don't think it is a spoiler. The fact that there was no music during the opening race. There was no music. It was just all the sound effects, right? And as somebody who designs, you know, their own sound for their own films, I have, you know, a real great appreciation for the sound designers and the sound mixers and the mixing and the mastering that goes into creating sound. And what they did with that was just off the charts incredible. And that's all you're hearing is just the natural sounds from the race. So the crunching and the tires and the screeching and the this and the, you know, the explosions and the turning, and it was fucking amazing. And the fact that it was a DeLorean is just icing on the cake. But everything else had to work. And Spielberg knew that. Spielberg knew that we cannot simply just rely on the nostalgia. The nostalgia had to become a character in the movie, not the movie in and of itself, right? The nostalgia is a character in the movie. So you have to have a real concrete, fun adventure narrative that the nostalgia can be a part of. And that makes the nostalgia that much more exciting when you get attached to everything else that's going on around it. And of course, I also really like the theatrical poster for Ready Player One because, you know, it harkens back to those great posters that we used to see in the 1980s, because they don't make posters like this anymore. I mean, I wish so much they would go back to the hand-drawn posters or the paintings or, you know, those kind of posters that we grew up with. And so, you know, it makes sense to have a theatrical poster that is very reminiscent of that time period. And I absolutely love it. I think it's great. I am contemplating actually purchasing it, getting it plaqued, and hanging it on my wall. So anyways, my name's Dave McCrae. If you want to follow me on Facebook, you can at facebook.com/manythingsdavemccrae. McCrae is MCRAE, facebook.com/manythingsdavemccrae. You can follow me there in the meantime and in between time, because when I'm not posting here, that's where I tend to post. So yeah. So again, you know, this is not a formal review. I'm not going through all the Easter eggs stuff because I don't do reviews. I just wanted to quickly come on here and say, go fucking see the movie and here's why. You know what I'm saying? All right. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.